Welcome to the Top Order podcast. All in the same room again this week. The Ashes dreams are over. Series is finished. We did a little bit of a wrap up from all over the world last week. Fiji and Auckland. We've still got a bit of aftermath to come in this podcast. What will the Ashes 2024 starting lineups look like? Over 8 issues in the World Test Championship.
Give the Gibbs on giving.
We've also got a little bit of a World Cup watch. Kane Williamson's injury is back in the nets on his Instagram, etc. Some Australian squad news as well. Marnus Labuschagne axed from the one-day international squad. And then I've got any other business all coming up on the Top Order podcast. Stay tuned. Very politely, and to be honest, it was almost a diktat. You want to open the pod, so without further ado, we're gonna hand over. Me and Lippy have got no idea what's about to come. It could be a resignation, retirement from international podcasting. We'll hand over to you.
Like that. So I just wanted to give a shout out, a message of love and support to one of the Auckland cricket community that's doing it tough at the moment. He's a member of the Lip Readers Cricket Club who's going through a health battle. Adam and I have played a couple of games. I think you played 1 or 2 games for the Lip Readers as a fill-in over the years, Stuart. I won't name him to embarrass him, but for the Lip Readers Cricket Club, we're all behind you, mate, and we give you our best love and support as you go through this tough fight, and I'm sure we'll see you on the other side of it very, very soon. So I just wanted to start off that love and support message for that young man, a beautiful fella, a great cricketer, but a beautiful human being in every sense of the word, and we wish him all the best, and our love and thoughts and prayers are with you, fella.
Here. Baldy, we're going to kick off, I think, with the Ashes aftermath. I know Lippy, as normal, has got reams and reams of paper here. Off camera, we have an A1 flip chart with a bunch of stuff on, which I'm sure we're going to come to. But look, I guess we've got a week or so after the dust has settled on this Ashes series. There's still a few talking points. There is an investigation into the ball change, apparently.
If you're Ricky Ponting, you get things happen, right?
Well, exactly. So the ICC taking a look into that and protocols, etc. It come out in the press, I think, that there's even a whisper that the ball is from a batch from 2 or 3 years ago. The manufacturer have vehemently denied that and have said that they want to get involved.
As have Surrey, I think. I think Surrey have said there's no way that it's a 2018-19 ball.
Because the balls go to the ground, is my understanding.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. We've then also got, I suppose, I guess a couple of retirements, obviously off the back of the Test match. That's sort of played out a little bit more in the media. We've also got both teams being fined from an overrate perspective. So from a possible 60 points, England come away with just 9 points given their overrate fines. So I don't know where we want to start, but I suppose the kind of the obvious point is probably those couple of what I would say are the relatively minor points before we come on to maybe what the Ashes lineups look like in 2024 down under. But yeah, thoughts on, I guess the overrate piece and the ball piece to start with?
Where are you at with the overrate stuff? Because I know you're normally very harsh on overrate penalties. We need to be doing something about this stuff. But then, and I'm in a similar camp, like it's no good to have 80 overs of cricket, all this kind of stuff that's going on. But then you look at that points table and you see Stuart Broad's comments, and I mean, obviously he's going to say that when, England plays that series. They played an excellent series, very entertaining cricket. They get 9 points from it. I think. Am I right to say that if they'd have played a 0-0 draw, and that it would have been even worse, right? But anyway, they basically get almost no points from the series. They end up with 16% or something of whatever the points they could have had. But what's the alternative? Like the whole point of all of these penalties is there needs to be some jeopardy, some actual reason for them to think, okay, well, we need to bowl our overs faster. What do we do if we don't take away points and don't find them?
Yeah, and look, probably the other point just before we sort of lean into how we sort of venge retribution on the teams for missing their overrates. The Australians get fined for the Old Trafford Test match, where 2 days was lost to rain. So it seems bizarre that you're not even completing the Test match, and you're obviously getting fined on an innings by innings basis. Look, I guess the question is, a lot of the media now talk about did the fan, that you would have polled on the way out of the ground feel as if they hadn't been entertained during the course of those test matches and as a result of the overrates? And you'd probably have to say that fans are walking away from all of the games saying, yeah, I've been right royally entertained throughout the course of the series.
Yeah, that's fair.
The second point, though, for me is, I have long been an advocate of making this an in-game penalty. I don't think that having it as a fine and points deducted has really been enough of a disincentive for the teams so far. Australia missed out on the World Test Championship final the first time round, the one that obviously was contested between India and New Zealand because of overrates.
Yep, and let's put it into perspective, into context. I think Australia were fined 4 points, and that was enough for them to miss the World Test Championship final.
Yeah,
a fine of 10 points for Australia, and I think it was 19 for England. That's a very, very significant penalty. And I don't want to say it prevents Australia or England from contesting that World Cup final, but that's a huge, huge impact, right? That's a huge fine.
In a 5-match series, definitely, when you look at those percentage points. And I think the other thing is it just doesn't seem right to me that that's going to be the rule across the whole of the Test Championship cycle, where there's a percentage of games that are going to be played on the subcontinent where there's lots and lots of spin, and therefore the likelihood is that overrates are going to be better in those games.
You'd hope so.
It's sort of almost disincentivizing having two fantastic pace attacks going up against each other over the course of a 5 Test match series. So I'm softening in terms of, I suppose, the fact that I think there needs to be something done to take away those draconian penalties after the fact. But I would still advocate, if we genuinely think that 90 overs in the day is the number that we need to get to, I think they need to look at how we have in-game penalties. And look, to be perfectly honest, it isn't just the bowling side now that are affecting the flow of the game. Yeah. It's very much both teams, and we often joke about it. I've talked about. But, at the end of the day, the bloke carries a kit bag the size of my kit bag just full of gloves for a test match series. So jokes aside, it is a problem that literally you will see a wicket fall in the first over of a session, and there's 3, 4, 12th men. That's probably incorrect, isn't it? It'd be the 12th, 13th and 14th men. But there's 4 or 5 people coming onto the ground. Guys are having drinks and towels and tablets and energy gels after one ball. It's bloody ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in here because I'm with you. The in-game penalty is the only penalty that makes sense. It's a sporting contest, and one team, if they're slowing down the game, the only people that are, well, not other than the fans, the people that are really being disadvantaged are the opposition, right? And the opposition get no benefit really from a post-game fine or World Test Championship points deduction. So in-game penalties are the way forward. Whether it's 10 runs off for a batsman who wants a batter who wants gloves brought out to them in the middle of a session. If you want to have a 12th man into the field for whatever reason, that's a 5-10 run penalty, like whatever it is, it has to be some kind of penalty for the fielding or batting side in the context of the game to prevent all the extra stoppages and what have you. And then you have to have some kind of formula that is fair, that is either a runs or a fielding penalty or something for a team that doesn't bowl their overs. And umpires have to step in, right? Because batters can slow the game down, and everyone does it. Everyone from club cricket to international cricket will garden, will check, whatever. There are many, many ways to slow the game down.
Yeah.
So the umpires have to play a part in that as well.
I saw Nasser Hussain talking about the bowling side just having to complete the overs required for that session to be finished. What do you think about that? I mean, obviously bowling sides will not want to be out there for, if they eat into their lunchtime and they get a 10-minute break for lunchtime, then that means they've got to go straight back out in the field for another session. I do think that the batters are slightly disadvantaged by that, sometimes if they bat through a session or something, I'm sure they need a break as well. But yeah, I don't know. I think there are lots of creative ideas out there, but we're not getting it at this stage.
Yeah, I don't think we'll land on necessarily what the solution is. I don't think that would be an option. If you look at, for example, that test match where Australia were batting really, really well, they wouldn't have wanted to come off in that session, and England would have absolutely wanted to come off. But it could have gone the other way as well. The batting side could be losing 3, 4, 5 wickets. Fielding side have been slow bowling their overs, yet taking wickets. The batting side would be like, "No, we want to get off now and have a little break. We don't want to carry on until the end of this." And I think, as I said, I do think it is now both teams that are slowing the game down. It's not just the fielding side that can control that. The only way to stop that would be when the bowler's ready, he runs in and bowls. If the batsman's off at mid wicket getting a pair of gloves, then you've got a bowl out option.
Non-stop cricket.
Yeah, exactly. And again, that's even in my suggestions, that one's a little bit ludicrous. So, but I do think it needs to be that in-game penalty, whether it's runs, whether it's a little zone, a tactical zone. And if you're a fielding player, you can go off and you can go and have a drink and you can go and have a rest, but you field with 10. Or you field with 9.
Mm-hmm.
And if
I agree.
And if it's your keeper, you don't have a keeper. And they wouldn't do it at that point, I don't think.
Yep. Or they'd run drinks on, like put a guy at fine leg for an over. You want to go get a drink? Do the old school thing that you do in club cricket. Go down to fine leg or third man for an over. Yeah. Get yourself a gel pack, get yourself a banana, back on the field, and away off you shoot.
Yeah, absolutely. Or off to KFC if you need to.
If you need the kernel. Moving on.
Let's talk about the ball change. Baldy, I'll come to you first, because I think clearly it impacted that that game in the sense that certainly the statistics from CricViz suggested it did a little bit more after that 35 over brand new rock came on. But your genuine thoughts, having had a little bit of time to reflect.
Yeah, I mean, the ball looked and behaved differently, and the challenge is that the ball clearly looked different. Now, whether or not the umpires had a like-for-like replacement and what we do about that in Test cricket when, all you've got as a replacement is a brand new cherry is maybe something that the ICC and the lawmakers at the MCC, revise as a result of this, right? And ultimately, what do we want to do? We want to replace a ball that is roughly the same look and feel and the same age with something that's similar. I don't think in this case this one was similar. I think that the change in behaviour is one of the beautiful vagaries of cricket, as is weather and meal breaks and overnight rest and all the rest of the weird and wonderful things that make this game the unique sport that it is. I don't think it changed the outcome of the match, but I think that its behaviour was different enough that people are going to be talking about it. And if we get a slightly more consistent interpretation of that going forward, then great. The reality is that no one changes a cricket ball. I think I said this last week. No one changes a cricket ball that's swinging and going around corners, right? So like the only way for a fielding side with a ball change is up almost by design, unless, Ravichandran Ashwin wants one with a flat surface that he can kind of land it on the edge of or something like that. But I think that now that Ricky Ponting's made a big deal out of it, everyone's making a big deal out of it. But ultimately, this happens sometimes in cricket, right? Sometimes you get the rub of the green. Sometimes the ball gets changed and it does something different. It's going to happen for Australia against Australia, for England against England, for every side. And you just have to roll with those punches, I think.
Well, what's going on with the balls? Because you touched on it last week. That they're trying it on. They're trying on every 5 overs into the game. They're trying it on, trying to get a new ball constantly. It seems like, whether that is just, this one's not doing enough. Let's see if we can get a better one. Let's constantly just keep seeing if we can get a better one. But then eventually they don't fit through those rings. So something is happening so that they're not quite, up to standard or whatever they're supposed to be. And surely they are supposed to last 80 overs.
Yeah, look, I think they did identify some issues in the manufacturing process at Duke's. Again, you can kind of read a little bit of the sort of press and whatnot, but the owner of Duke's mentioned that, through COVID, it affected some of the tanneries where the leather came from, and they had identified, some issues that were, not able to be really seen until the ball goes out onto the field and starts to actually perform. Yeah. They believe they've rectified those. Clearly, with the batch that they played with in this series, I think a little bit of it is Australia and England, interestingly, I think are probably two of the most scientific teams in terms of the way they try and get the ball to reverse. And, you'll often see both of those sides save a guy that you'd think would be bowling with a relatively new ball. in order that when it does start to reverse relatively early, and it used to be that, cricket balls would reverse at, 50, 60 overs.
Yeah.
They're now getting them to reverse at 25, 30 overs at times. So I think the science of the way that the teams are trying to sort of actually utilise a new ball, the Duke's very different to the Kookaburra. Kookaburra is, 6 to 12 overs. It really swings
with a new ball.
With a new ball up front. The Duke's doesn't.
Yep.
You actually wait till the lacquer comes off, and it probably comes alive after 6 to 10 overs.
Yep.
And that's where you get that, that swing. So I definitely think they need to, to potentially look at those protocols. But it's a pretty big briefcase that they bring out. So, you would hope that they've got enough of a selection of cricket balls, particularly in that sort of, 30, 40, between 30 and 50 overs, depending on the conditions when you've aged that ball, in a previous game or a bunch of net sessions. You would hope you'd find something comparable. Probably the most difficult one is, finding a ball that's, 6 or 7 overs old. Is probably the more difficult thing. So they definitely need to look at it. But I think that for me, it was one of those things that's a vagary of the game, like you say, Baldy, with the overheads, or sometimes a ball just does more than another ball. And ultimately, it's in the hands of the umpires. And, if they haven't followed the protocol properly, or they've made an error, then they might have to, stick their hand up and say, well, yeah, we probably could have taken another 3 or 4 minutes to ask for another box to be sent out, or made a better call on which one was the right rock.
If they're going to use them for first class and international matches, like having 24 cricket balls at a cricket club, at a first class cricket ground, is not a big deal. Like, I don't see, like...
Well, they're bloody expensive, mate.
They are, but in the context...
A couple of £100 a ball.
Yeah, okay, well, get 12 more people to go to the cricket, and then you've paid for the balls. Like, you know what I mean? It's just get more balls. I mean, if you take it to its logical extreme, an umpire could have 80 cricket balls sitting there. One's 1 over old, one's 80 overs old, and you've got every possible combination of X overs old in between, and then just go, well, that one's 33 overs old, we'll take that one out, we'll put that one in, and away off you shoot. But, I mean, that's taking it to a logical extreme. Let's just live with the vagaries of cricket and move on.
Awesome. Well, we spent a lot of time talking about the two small issues. Let's talk a little bit. And I think there's been a lot of these kind of conversations going on, and they've probably centred on what's going to happen in the Ashes in 4 years' time. And I think you would need several crystal balls to get to that stage. But 2024, so we're probably a little over 18 months away from an Australian Ashes summer. I'm hoping, Australia should really kick off at the Gabba. I don't know if they've announced the order yet, but if they don't, they've got rocks in their head. Who do we think is going to be in that Australian team? And then I guess we'll answer the same question for the English as well.
Well, the Gabba's going to be an interesting one, just touching on that, because the Gabba's going to be out of action for a long, long time in the lead up to the Brisbane Olympics in 2032. So that ground's going to be torn down, built into the Olympic Stadium,
really?
and then completely rebuilt back into a cricket ground somehow afterwards. I'm not exactly sure how it's going to work. But yes, that whole...
So there won't be an Ashes test at Brisbane in 2024?
Oh, I don't think so.
Right, okay.
And unless they find some other first-class cricket ground.
Take them 8 years to build it.
Yeah, so they have to knock down the school that's on that block. They have to knock down a bunch of buildings that are on that block, knock the stadium down, go right down to the foundations and rebuild an Olympic
let's scratch
stadium.
the grounds. Let's talk about the players.
The Olympics. I don't feel like the Olympics is the biggest joke. What? Not the actual event, but hosting an Olympics seems like you just to destroy your country and all your infrastructure in it to host the Olympics. But anyway, that's probably a separate podcast.
That's for our spin-off podcast. Yeah.
Regional Victoria asked them about the Commonwealth Games, so they're just absolutely bollocks. But anyway, we'll move on. We'll talk about cricket. Where were we?
Players. I think you were about to get that piece of paper out.
Okay, I have, unfortunately for all the listeners and viewers, I have some prepared remarks, and I have actually prepped this. So here is the Cricket Australia depth chart, Baldy's depth chart for the Ashes in 2024-25. So this is our test one.
You have to talk into the microphone, especially for listeners at home.
So here we go.
Boy, oh boy.
So I've actually prepped it. I've colour-coded everybody. So the batters are in green, the all-rounders are in orange, and the bowlers are in red.
I'll step away from my microphone and hold it for that.
You just hold that up, Stuart, and I'll talk you through it.
There's a slight flaw in this plan that this doesn't really work for the listener.
No, it doesn't work for the listener, but I'm going to talk through it. Effectively, if you have a look at this depth chart, everybody who's in the first team is going to be about 35,000 years old when we get to the next Ashes. And Stuart pointed it out the other day that I was rattling off a bunch of Australians that will still be around in 18 months' time. And then Stuart said, well, that looks very, very old. And I started to agree with him. And then I started looking for replacements. And there aren't many that are under 30. So even if you have a look at the depth chart, Michael Neese is 34, Scott Boland is 35. Australia's highest run scorer in the domestic 4-day competition is going to be 35 by the time the Ashes starts. So Dan Hughes as a potential replacement for Dave Warner will be 35, 36 by the time it starts. So Australia have some, well, let's just say some unearthing to do of talent to secure, some looking forward, I don't know, depth chart replacement for when, Kawaja, Smith, Hazelwood, Stark, etc., retire. So I started to add some names down the right-hand side. So we start to look at guys like Ollie Davies, who when we spoke to Shane Bond a couple of seasons ago at the start of the BBL, he predicted him as a breakout character. Tanvir Sangha, likewise, who's just been picked in Australia's one-day squad. Those are the kinds of guys, Mackenzie Harvey, Will Sutherland, Ashley Chandrasinghe in Perth, in Victoria, Teague Wiley in Perth. They're the guys that need to really step up over the next 18 months and make a mark for themselves in the build-up to this next Ashes series. If Australia roll out the same kind of team that they had this series in 18 months' time, it's going to be a very, very experienced side, probably one of the best, most experienced sides we've ever had. But, that bowling attack, Stark 34-35, Hazelwood 34, Lyon 37, that's a fairly old bowling attack to go 5 tests back to back to back against England.
I'm going to put this down because it's very heavy.
Yeah.
But I will say after all of that, I actually think your only changes are going to be your openers, aren't they?
I think Kawaja will still be there at 37.
Maybe.
He could still be there. The challenge for Australia is, like England post Alistair Cook, post Andrew Strauss, there isn't a lot banging down the door that's scoring a lot of runs in domestic level, other than Dan Hughes, who will be 35, 36 when the next Ashes rolls around in Australia. Or you're looking at a guy who's 21, 22 like Teague Wiley, Ashley Chandrasinghe is 21, 22, or guys like Marcus Harris and Matt Renshaw, who in their admittedly limited test careers to date, are averaging in the mid-20s or low 30s. So there's not a lot there that is a proven commodity for Australia going forward in the opening stakes.
And the segues actually quite nicely to a question that came in on Facebook from it's about David Warner, so don't hold that against him because he's a very good man, Simon. He basically wanted to know what you think about whether Warner actually justified his Ashes selection. And I think that when I thought about that question, I think all of those names that you just named made me think, what were the other alternatives?
Well, the other alternative was Dan Hughes, who averaged 60 in the domestic Sheffield Shield season last year, and has been tearing up trees for a couple of years now. He's performed very, very well. If you're asking me the question, did David Warner meet the selectors' expectations? I think they probably did. Did he perform around about his overseas average since COVID? Yep. Did he not score 100? Yep. If you have a look at the last 5 or 6 years of him touring overseas, that's about what you get with David Warner. You got a couple of 50s, you got some scores, you got a bunch of scores past 20, which is a lot better than he did in the last Ashes series. But really, that's about what you have to expect from David Warner overseas. Would we have liked to have seen more than that? Absolutely. But, averaging 30, I can't believe it, is about what I kind of had expected to get from David Warner in this overseas Ashes tour, because that's what he's delivered for us overseas for the last 5 or 6 years. Yeah, certainly post-COVID.
It's not a ringing endorsement, is it? But as you say.
And Baldy, he's obviously retired, or I guess intending to retire in that Sydney Test match against Pakistan in the new year if he makes it that far. Other than him, is there anyone that you would, at this stage actually draw a solid line through and say there's no way they play in 2 years' time or 18 months' time?
I don't think so. I mean, Lyon will be 37,
and
I think he's probably the one that might go, you know what, actually, I've got a big calf injury now. I'm only playing one form of cricket. it's going to be a tough road back from here. He might not make it back, and that depends on how his injury goes. He might be the only one that we draw a line under. A lot of people would probably have drawn a line through Usman Khawaja if he hadn't had such a good series this series. He's a great performer at home. I think he's going to have a great summer against Pakistan and the West Indies. Yeah. So I think he'll be ready to go in 18 months' time. And as long as he's scoring runs and enjoying being in that Australian setup, I think he's still locked in.
Before we move to England, the other question I had is, do you think Pat Cummins will still be the captain?
I'm not sure. I think that very much depends on how Travis Head goes in the next 18 months. I think he's probably the guy alongside Cameron Green who's probably being earmarked for that Australian captaincy long term. The question is, of course, for Travis Head, can he get over the weakness that kind of has been shown in this Ashes series, which is that he didn't really handle the short pitch bowling very well. Not every side will be able to exploit that as well as England did, and not every set of conditions will be as conducive to having that exploited through pitches and whatever. If he can master that, I think he's the natural kind of successor to the Australian captaincy. I think he's going to be in his early 30s by the time this next Ashes series rolls around. Cameron Green is another one who's been mentioned, but as we've seen in the last 6 months, Mitch Marsh did enough that his place in the team, Cameron Green's place in the team, wasn't assured by the end of the season.
They can't make Green captain in 18 months. That would be absolute madness.
So. No, I think it would be madness. And
especially when Marsh is your premier all-rounder.
And Marsh is the Australian captain going to South Africa on tour when Pat Cummins is not playing. He's got a wrist injury. So, there is no clear leadership successor to Pat Cummins in this Australian side other than Travis Head. And prior to the Ashes series, I would have said he'd be the natural successor. But I think we really need to see how he bounces back from that Ashes tour, and particularly how he handles the challenges that are going to be thrown at him with short pitch bowling going forward. And West Indies and Pakistan have got two reasonable pace attacks. They're going to be trying it out for sure.
Yeah, I think the Cummins thing is interesting because it's hard, but it's a hard job, isn't it? Hard job to be captain in all three formats. Hard job to be captain as a bowler for an extended period of time. So yeah, it's one to watch. Binksy, I'm sure there's questions for you around England. We've obviously just seen Stuart Broad and Moeen Ali, although Moeen Ali was not someone we 6 months ago thought would be in the series anyway. But early thoughts on who you think might be changing by the time we get to those Ashes in Australia?
Yeah, well, look, I don't think James Anderson makes the plane. He'll be nearly 43 at that point, I think. So I think, even though he's certainly, from a fitness perspective, apparently still doing everything he can on the yo-yos and, is living a clean lifestyle and all that kind of jazz, you can't think that he's going to be there. I think from a bowling perspective, I'd also have a question mark around Chris Wokes. Has had overseas. A couple of, A, overseas, and B, just from an injury perspective, he's had a few issues, and I think he's a 3 format player as well, or is a 3 format player for England. So I can't necessarily see him being there. I think the good thing for England is they do have some pretty decent stocks of fast bowlers. I think the question mark really is around who's going to be fit. Mark Wood's probably going to be obviously closer to the end of his career, and I think what they'll want to do is take 2 or 3 guys that that can bowl at that pace. And there's some people around the game that I think will definitely be in that in that shake-up. Jofra Archer is one that
if he's not full-time contracted
if he's
Mumbai.
Not full-time contracted to Mumbai, but I think if you asked him, he probably wants to play a bit more Test cricket. I think he's probably would feel he's got some unfinished business from that perspective. So I think if they can get Wood and probably Archer fit, that they would be on the plane if they're still performing to those powers. I then think where it becomes interesting is I think Ollie Robinson is almost a natural replacement, I think, for Stuart Broad. And then there's a bunch of guys that have been in and around that squad. So I think the likes of Matthew Potts, Josh Tongue, I think probably makes the play, and if he can stay fit. And then there's probably the next batch. So I think Bryden Cast has played some one-day international cricket with Durham. Gus Atkinson at Surrey, who bowls high 80s and looks like he's that kind of bowler that's going to succeed. And then I think there's also guys like Sam Curran that probably come into the mix, and he might be that switch in for for Wokes as almost a like for like. From a batting perspective, look, you've got to say, I think that at this stage on form and on the way that they've played, Zach Crawley, Ben Duckett, Joe Root, Harry Brook.
It's funny, it's so funny, isn't it? Like all these guys, Pope even as well. You kind of thought, 12 months ago that these guys would not have test careers.
Well, Pope's probably the one that's, almost the most under risk now, given the way that some of these guys have gone. Johnny Bairstow will be pretty old, so I'd expect that we might see a change of keeper for them. But again, Johnny Bairstow will probably come and prove you wrong. And I think that, the permutation there isn't a Ben Folkes conversation. It's actually Ben Folkes' understudy at Surrey, James Smith.
Oh, not James Root.
So I think Jamie Smith is one that they've definitely got their eye on. And then James Root as well. And the thing with James Root, I think, is he could be there as a batter and also as a keeper. I think as a keeper, he's still relatively young and probably got a little bit to do to kind of get his craft where it goes. And then the big question mark for me is the captain, is Ben Stokes. He's held together with Elastoplast and Araldite at the moment. Interesting, he was bowling a few off spinners in the nets. I just wonder whether we've got a slight Colin Miller situation in terms of, he's the kind of guy. And it's bloody annoying, isn't it? He hits a golf ball a long way. He's probably great at karaoke. He can probably cook. And then he's just going to decide that he's going to bowl some little tweakers and he'll probably be, fantastic at that, given 6 or 7 months in the nets. So look, joking aside on that, I genuinely do think that's an option, that he probably has another string to his bow and tries to add that little bit of
if he can't bowl and he just has to play as a batter, where do you see him in the England setup? Is he still a lock in that side?
Look, absolutely. If he has got the appetite, and I think what we're talking about is England are 12 months into, or 14 months now into the Ben Stokes cycle. So if you kind of look at it, 3.5, 4 years is about where international captains kind of get to. There's a few exceptions, Kane Williamson went on for a lot longer than that. But if you look at the guys that have been really successful at it, that's about the shelf life, is a 4-year cycle. So he's going to be right on the cusp of that. But again, I think because he missed out on that series in, would it have been 2017 when he had the Affray charge? So I think because he missed out on that, I think he would like to have another crack in Australia potentially. So look,
because the last one was void, wasn't it?
Yeah,
2021.
well, absolutely, yeah. So
didn't count.
Yeah, tongue in cheek for that, of course. So look, I think that's the question. Yeah, the question for me. I think if you play it out 4 years, it's almost impossible to predict. But certainly from a batting perspective, Stokes on his form over the last 18 months, he's averaging well above 50.
He's been good.
He's in the side. And Joe Root looks as if he's got a new lease of life. I think he's got Sachin in his sights for runs scored. If he maintains that hunger.
Heard it here first. That is a bold prediction. That is a bold.
They play so many tests. It's if he wants to,
20 tests a year for the next 4 years.
They play 17 roughly. But it's near as damn it. Yeah. Should we move on from the Ashes, given that it's finished?
Yeah. Let's
let's talk. Let's talk about. I guess that we've kind of penned it as a World Cup watch. We're still a little bit away from the tournament. Do we want to cover off what the hell's going on? Like, I've got a barbecue in the diary for October, but the BCCI can't seem to get their grounds and fixtures confirmed. Would that be acceptable if it was any other country hosting?
I don't think so, because people would have booked. So I mean, for anyone who doesn't know, the BCCI is still. It took them a long time to name the schedule or to announce all the dates and fixtures and all of that. I feel like almost immediately after they announced it, they changed the Pakistan-India game. Now they're talking about changing the Pakistan-England game. In order to change the Pakistan-India game, they had to change Pakistan-Sri Lanka. And, I guess there was a lot of conversations about changing the Pakistan games for political reasons, but these are not for political reasons. These are because they clash with various festivals or different things that you would have thought maybe they kind of considered when they were
Just got a calendar and had a quick look.
organising everything. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'd be massively frustrated if I was going to the tournament, had been considering buying tickets. I'm sure some people have bought, booked in hotels and accommodation and all that kind of stuff.
Well,
so,
even from a playing perspective, you would have thought a lot of the teams would have started to do their scouting, their matchups, what do we need for these grounds. And that plays into the squad selections as well, doesn't it? If you're going to be playing most of your games in a venue that favours spin, you might pick that spinning all-rounder rather than another seaming all-rounder.
And that's hugely impactful in a tournament where you're only allowed to take 15 players to begin with. The page before the page of my test depth chart is my one-day depth chart for the World Cup.
Oh, good. We're getting that out again.
We're going to get it out again.
Oh, good.
But I won't put it up on the screen. But my point is, it's very, very easy to get to 15. And if you want to go to India where there's so many different conditions and be able to have a lot of variety that you can throw at opposition, that where you play becomes super, super important.
Yeah.
Super important. And it's really unfortunate that, India have not yet finalised that schedule. And it's terrible for the fans and if anyone has read the article in Cricket Info this week, it's a really, really good article about the plight of the Indian fan trying to get into Indian grounds and watch cricket in India. It's a very, very different experience to almost anywhere else in the world. And it's shaping up that this World Cup will be even more challenging for Indian fans from a affordability perspective.
They've got to go to the ground to get a paper ticket the day before. It's bloody ridiculous.
And you can't get it the day of the game. There's a lot of challenges with going to watch cricket in India. We're very, very privileged here in that we don't have those same kinds or same levels of challenge, certainly not on that magnitude.
Let's go from, I guess, a bad news World Cup story in terms of that scheduling and a potential good news story for New Zealand. We've seen on the socials, there's hope in your eye, Liffey, isn't there?
It's a tease, isn't it?
There's hope in your eye.
Well, look, there is, it's sort of like, I just keep thinking of the Jim Carrey scene, isn't it, in Dumb and Dumber? You're telling me there's a chance that, when we see Kane Williamson batting in the nets, in his kit, what I actually enjoyed is he's got a ball in his hand and he's just twirling it. We don't see him bowl very much anymore, but
long sleeves on already.
No. Hey. We don't see him bowl very much anymore, but the fact that he's just instinctively spinning it and off spin did get me excited. But I don't know. I mean, look, I do think that he's already said he's going to this. The side has already said they're taking him to this tournament, whether he's fit or not. He's going to be on the plane and be around the squad.
Yeah, write the team song, take the guitar.
Exactly, that'd be really valuable. But I don't think he'll be there. If I had to bet, I still don't think he'll actually play a game in the tournament. The thing is that you look at all of those, an ACL injury. I went back and when I saw that footage, I was like, okay, check the date. Like, what date did this injury happen? Because, it's always sort of 9 months, isn't it? 9 months is the figure they always talk about with ACLs, and it's the end of March. So it feels like we're going to see him at the end of this year or this,
Christmas time.
New Year time. And as much as yes, there is. When I saw that footage, there was hope in my eyes, and I was thinking, oh, please, just if it can happen, it would be amazing. But yeah, I think if I had to bet my life on it, I would still say we don't see him back. I think the exciting thing again from seeing that footage and seeing Gary Stead come on and talk a little bit after in the carefully curated social media piece was that they both talked about how this little break has not reinvigorated his hunger, but the hunger's still there to come and play for New Zealand. And I guess when you have a challenging injury like this is, we have a long period of time away from the game, and you have to think, do I actually want to go through this recovery? I mean, he's only 33, but I think 33 today, actually, as we record this.
Well, happy birthday, Kane.
But yeah, I think it's exciting to see him back, and hopefully, if he can be, I'd love to see him in that World Cup, but if he can be fit and rearing to go against South Africa and Australia for our home summer in the tests, I'd be pretty happy with that.
We'll finish with India's struggles against the West Indies in the white ball game, but we've got to come to Baldy's not physical depth charts this time, Michael.
Oh, okay.
You sure? I'm happy to hold it up.
No, don't hold it up. Don't hold it up. I have done a lot of work on this because, like I said, I started working on it at the weekend, and what I quickly realised is Australia have got a lot of questions to answer getting ready for India in this World Cup, and the naming of the squad to South Africa and for T20s and ODIs gives us some indication of the way the selectors are thinking, and you tease that at the top.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question before you go into, I guess, the depth chart? There's no reason that they needed to name this as their provisional World Cup squad.
Yeah, it feels early, doesn't it?
The fact that they've kind of said this is for the upcoming tour and it's also provisionally our World Cup squad.
It's a bit weird.
Is that not backing yourself into a little bit of a corner?
A huge corner. Yeah, absolutely. And there's guys that I would be having in my, I've got on the page that I would be having a real look at that aren't in that list. Particularly when it comes to some of the batting spots. I think Australia, if you have a look at the squads that have been named, there aren't that many batters there, but there's a ton of all-rounders. So the question I've got...
It's been the formula for Australia recently in white ball cricket, though, hasn't it?
It has. I mean, it has, Stu, but if there's an injury to one of those batters, there's not a lot of cover there. So they've named, from memory, in the ODI squad, they've named Warner, Head and Smith, a couple of keepers.
Yeah.
And that's basically
Inglis,
it. And
Inglis and Carey.
Yeah. But they've named a ton of all-rounders. So they've named 4 all-rounders. They've named Marsh, Stoinis, Maxwell and Cameron Green. Now, those guys are really effectively fighting for 3 spots, I think. I think one of them is going to miss out because if you're going to go to India, you have to take 2 spinners, I would say, which means Ashton Agar's probably in the mix there at some point, as well as Adam Zampa. They've taken Tanveer Sangha to South Africa.
Take at least 2 spinners. I guess Maxwell covers...
Maxwell is providing cover. I think they're looking at guys like, can Travis Head provide some cover? Can Steve Smith provide some cover? So there's some really important pieces of that batting
happy if Steve Smith was bowling to me in a World Cup game if I was the opposition. But anyway, carry on.
That's one of the questions, right? Is how do we get our 50 overs in? Because there are a lot of all-rounders there, but can you rely on any one of them to bowl you 10 overs and take an extra batter or one fewer bowler or whatever? The challenge Australia have is that second point down the bottom there, Stu. The spin all-rounder is not a batting spin all-rounder. It's either Maxwell or Agar as the second spinner. And Agar is too high at 7 or 8, in my view. He's a great number 9. Like, he averages, I think, 20 with the bat and ODI cricket, strike rate at 85. But really, if you're relying on him to bat at 8 or even at 7, if you want to take 5 specialist bowlers, it feels like Australia go too light into the batting in that. So there's lots of balance questions for Australia, whereas New Zealand have a guy like Ravindra or like Santner, who can be that second spin option, but also can bat at 7 and be quite handy in that area. So that's a real key for me is how we answer that question.
I think, this might sound harsh and I'm sure I'll get proven wrong, but I think the other thing for Australia is Alex Carey isn't a gun batter who keeps. He's, a really good wicket keeper. Yep. But, when you then compare him to a Jos Buttler or a Rishabh Pant or a Quinton de Kock, he's not giving you that, that absolute... He's not opening the batting.
And he's not explosive
and
either.
He's not explosive.
Well, even a Tom Latham.
Yeah.
He's not a rock. He wouldn't be selected as a batter in that side, would he?
I would completely agree. And that's why I've got question marks on guys like Josh Philippe, who's not in that side. Yeah. Josh Inglis is, but I'm like, those are the questions that are still kind of wandering around inside this kind of pinball machine that is my brain, and why I wrote it all down.
When I looked at that side and obviously looked at the spin, Tanveer Sangha, I think you touched on it before earlier in the episode. I remember when 2019, I think when we first talked to Shane Bond and he mentioned Tanveer at that time. They obviously must think a lot of him if they're picking him in this provisional squad because he hasn't played cricket for a year, has he? He's been injured. So
yeah, he has.
They must really rate him, and it kind of got me thinking they either really rate him highly, which I'm sure they do, young player around the squad, but also like, I don't know. I think that sort of says a bit about the depth of their spin, I think, as well.
I think what it also highlights is the depth of the Big Bash, I think, has diminished over the course of the last 2 or 3 years. I know we've talked about this, Baldy, off air, but it felt at one point as if it was the next cab off the rank in terms of strength of tournament to the IPL. But I think that, the salary cap and the overseas players that have come in and probably just the proliferation of other options have really diminished that Big Bash, which probably means you can't tell the form of some of those guys because they've performed, let's be honest, against some guys that have come onto the scene but out of club cricket. There's been a few of those kind of stories, and
they have,
a few guys that are kind of broken onto that Big Bash scene. So I think that doesn't help Australia, particularly because they've not had the same amount of players in the IPL that they have historically as well. Let's come on to India. So dominant in the Test match tour of West Indies, which you would have really foreseen, I think, given that the strength of West Indian red ball cricket. But they've got some worries in the white ball game, haven't they?
Yeah, maybe. Maybe they need to disband India. India needs to go the separate ways in states and actually try and revitalise their cricket. But no, all joking aside, I don't think they have huge concerns. I mean, I always think to myself, we shouldn't probably read too much into 2 months out, 3 months out white ball kind of series that actually are in a different country and have different scenarios with probably different squads. But I do think kind of all the things that we've talked about a lot with Indian cricket, particularly in their white ball setup, all of the challenges that they have to actually just pick a squad and pick a bunch of players. I do think that has problems for them because, when we think about these other sides, and even we're just talking about Australia, yes, there are, depth chart battles in a few different areas, but they're quite limited areas. Whereas actually when I look at that India squad, they could pick 15 different combinations of a World Cup squad and I wouldn't really bat an eyelid because there's, 5-6 different spinners they could choose. There's all these different opening bat options. And I think that does, I don't know, it must muck up your own perspective as a cricketer about what your role is and what your expectations are when it comes to the crunch.
You nailed it, Stu. It's what's my role and do I have any certainty in that? And that's what England have done so well over the last 12 months. They've given their players certainty over their role and certainty over their spots in the side. I'm sure that there are players in that Indian squad and have been for the last 18 months looking over their shoulder at the next up-and-coming batter or bowler or spinning all-rounder and thinking to themselves, shit, well, if I go out and don't have a great game today, I'll be dropped and I might not get another opportunity again. And that absolutely affects your mental performance.
Well, you look at it. Ashwin, Jadeja, Chahal, Akshar, Kuldeep. There's 5 just rattled off spinners.
How many of them are you going to take to the World Cup?
They can't all be in that
2?
squad.
Maybe 3.
Oh, batters, Jaiswal, Rohit, Gill, KL Rahul, Ishan Kishan, Kohli, Skies, Sanju Samson.
Hardik.
There's, Tilak Varma's been one of the bright lights of this West Indies tour for them. So, Gaikwad, the names just go on and on. But, how do they get this side into a unit? And I don't think the way they go about things by picking 15 different squads for every single tour
doesn't build that team ethos, that team identity, does it really?
I don't think so. Although now the voices playing inside my head are just the voices, that same kind of stuff that we were saying before the Australia won the T20 World Cup. So
that was a different scenario, though. That was Australia trying to figure out if they had a cricket team or not. This is India trying to figure out which of their 7 cricket teams to pick and put together a squad.
Yeah, I think the benefit they have, you talk about those spinners, Ravi Jadeja, Ashwin, Akshar to a certain extent, all of them can play a role with the bat as well. They're all good enough to bat.
Exactly.
They're all good enough to bat number 7, aren't they? You would have thought maybe even Jadeja 5 or 6. So that probably just helps them to maybe get 3 spinners, 4 spinners into that side. But it's an embarrassment of batting riches, isn't it? And then certainly from a matchups perspective, how do they get that right? Do they want the left arm option? Which seamers are they going to go with? But all to play for. But at least they know what grounds they're probably playing at, because they've probably got the inside word, haven't they?
It's exciting to be talking about this World Cup. Grinning just thinking about it. Actually, you guys have been grinning through all this Ashes, but this World Cup is exciting for me.
You love a 50 over tournament.
I do.
You do love a 50 over tournament.
Let's finish the podcast. We've had, I guess a request in to give a little bit of a shout out for, a charity cricket event coming up. Stu, do you want to give the details?
Yeah, so actually just two little things. We had I put a shout out for questions on our socials, and we had a brilliant question that we haven't covered, which is that we talked a little bit about last week, about kind of tongue-in-cheek England saving Test cricket and baseball and all of that kind of stuff, and we gave it a bit of voice then. But actually we decided that someone asked that same question, how would we save Test cricket? And we decided it was such a good question that we might actually put a lot more thought into it and try and make it a full episode on its own and actually sort of discuss those things.
And we'll release it to the boards first and see if we can get some money for it, shall we?
Yeah, exactly. There's some consulting fees in that podcast for sure.
But what you're referencing before, we had one of our listeners, Cam, who been sort of with us from the early days. So thanks for the support there. But has reached out just to let us know about a fundraiser coming up for Taniwha Cricket Club. Basically, they I think did it last year as well. 24-hour net session. Go in, bowl and bat, 20,000 deliveries. They're hoping to raise $20,000, and all the money will go to charity. And this year it's a charity called the Swan Nest, who provide children with therapy, support, and advocacy. So awesome to be doing these kind of things, especially in difficult times and stuff at the moment. So,
Stuart, how can they get involved? How listeners?
We will chuck a link to the Give a Little page in our show notes and throw it on the socials a bit closer to the time. That doing the event down around about the end of August. So we'll throw all the details up. But keep an eye out on our socials and keep an eye out on look in the show notes, and you can find all the Give a Little details there. Anything you can support would be much appreciated, I'm sure.
Fantastic. That's a lot of cricket balls to hit, isn't it?
It is.
A lot of cricket balls. That's it for the show. As we mentioned, we are going to come to you with how we save Test cricket. We've got a World Cup coming up. We've got an Australian one-day tour. We've got plenty of cricket. We've got Kane Williamson's weekly.
New Zealand's playing soon.
Yeah, Kane Williamson's weekly injury watch as well. All coming on the top of the podcast. But for tonight, it's good night. God bless from us here in Auckland. We'll speak to you soon. Good night.